For 30 years, the Patriot missile system has been the symbol of American air defense dominance in the Gulf, not just a weapons system. The system that became the centerpiece of every American security guarantee to every Gulf partner that has hosted American forces. The system that American defense officials pointed to whenever the question of Iranian missile capability was raised and the answer needed to be reassuring. The Patriot was the answer. The Patriot was proof that American technological superiority translated into genuine protection, that the investment in American military hardware was an investment in real security rather than political theater, that the shield was real, that the missiles coming in would be stopped. And today, in a series of engagements across the Gulf theater that American military officials are describing in the most carefully qualified language available. While their private assessments tell a completely different story, the shield has been penetrated in ways that have no reassuring explanation, and that change every calculation about what American air defense in the Gulf actually provides to the partners whose security depends on it. The Russian technology that Iran just activated is not a surprise to the intelligence professionals who have been tracking its deployment. It is a surprise to the political officials who were told for years that the gap between Iranian offensive capability and American defensive capability was too large to close. That gap is closed. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what technology Iran activated, why it defeats the Patriot in ways that the Patriot's designers did not account for when the system was built for the threat environment of the 1980s and 1990s. What the penetration means for every American partner in the Gulf whose security architecture is built around Patriot coverage, what it means for the $39 trillion American defense investment that has been producing systems increasingly mismatched to the threats they face, and why the countries watching Patriot's performance in the current conflict are drawing conclusions about American military technology that will reshape defense procurement decisions, alliance calculations, and geopolitical alignments for the next generation. The shield is not what it was sold as. And the people who knew that and said nothing are about to have to explain what the silence cost. Start with what the Patriot system actually does and what it was designed to do. Because the gap between those two things is the gap where the current crisis lives. The Patriot Advanced Capability System, in its current PAC-3 variant, is a ground-based air defense system designed to intercept ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and aircraft. It uses radar to track incoming targets, fires interceptor missiles designed to collide with or detonate near incoming threats, and operates within a defended area that covers a specific geographic zone around the launcher. At the time PAC-3 was developed and deployed, the threat environment it was designed to address was defined by the ballistic missiles that potential adversaries of the United States and its partners were known to possess. Relatively simple trajectories, predictable re-entry profiles, limited ability to maneuver during the terminal phase of flight. The Patriot system was optimized for that threat. It was not optimized for a threat environment that includes maneuvering re-entry vehicles, hypersonic glide vehicles, saturation tactics that overwhelm the engagement capacity of individual Patriot batteries, and the specific combination of electronic warfare and target multiplicity that the Russian technology Iran has activated was explicitly designed to defeat. Russia designed that technology specifically to defeat American air defense systems. It was designed by engineers who had studied Patriot's specifications, capabilities, and limitations with the thoroughness of adversaries whose survival planning requires knowing exactly where the gaps in American defensive capability are. And Iran has been the recipient of that technology through a relationship with Moscow that the current conflict has accelerated in ways that American intelligence tracked, but that American policy proved unable to prevent. Here is the specific Russian technology that changed the equation. Because the general claim that Russian technology has defeated Patriot requires the specific details that give it strategic meaning. The technology operates across two overlapping domains that together create a defensive penetration capability that no single countermeasure currently deployed in the Gulf can address. The first domain is electronic warfare, Russia's Krasuka series electronic warfare systems, and the derivatives and variants that have been transferred to Iranian military operators and packages that American officials have been documenting for years are designed to jam and deceive the radar systems that Patriot uses to track incoming threats. The jamming does not need to be complete to be effective. It only needs to create enough uncertainty in the Patriot radar's target picture to degrade the intercept probability from the near certain engagement rates that American officials have cited to the embarrassingly lower rates that actual combat performance in the current conflict has produced. When Patriot radar is being actively jammed by systems designed specifically to exploit its frequency characteristics and its signal processing vulnerabilities, the confident engagement statistics from test range performance become something significantly less reliable in a real combat environment against a prepared adversary. The second domain is terminal maneuverability. The specific variants of Iranian ballistic missiles that have been upgraded with Russian-derived guidance and maneuver packages execute unpredictable terminal phase trajectory changes that the Patriot interceptor's kinematic envelope cannot always accommodate. A Patriot interceptor is launched based on a predicted intercept point. If the incoming missile maneuvers significantly after the interceptor is already in flight, the intercept geometry degrades in ways that reduce the engagement probability to levels that do not constitute the reliable shield that the system's reputation implies. Here's what saturation tactics add to the electronic warfare and maneuvering capability to create a three-layer penetration approach that the current Patriot architecture in the Gulf cannot reliably defeat. Saturation is the simplest of the three layers to understand and the one whose logic is most difficult to argue against. Each Patriot battery has a finite engagement capacity. It can track a finite number of targets simultaneously and engage a finite number of them within a given time window. If the number of incoming threats exceeds that capacity, some of those threats get through regardless of how capable the system is against individual targets. Iran has invested in exactly the missile inventory volume required to create saturation conditions against the Patriot coverage that American partners in the Gulf currently have deployed. The combination of large numbers of relatively simple ballistic missiles, whose primary function is to saturate the engagement capacity of Patriot batteries, with smaller numbers of electronically jammed and terminally maneuvering missiles designed to defeat the specific engagements that Patriot attempts against them, is a three-layer penetration architecture that was tested in the laboratory of the current conflict and produced results that American air defense planners are processing with the alarm that validation of worst-case scenarios always generates. The electronic warfare degrades the radar. The maneuvering defeats the interceptor kinematics. The saturation overwhelms the engagement capacity. Any one of those three elements alone is a challenge that American air defense can manage. All three simultaneously, coordinated by Iranian operators who have been trained in their combined employment by Russian military advisors who know exactly where the Patriot's weaknesses are, is a challenge that the current architecture in the Gulf is not adequately prepared for. Now here is the $39 trillion dimension of Patriot's failure. Because this is where the technology story connects to the financial and strategic story that affects every government and every household dependent on the global economy that the current conflict is stressing. The Patriot system represents one of the largest single-item defense export lines in American defense industrial history. Every Gulf state that has purchased Patriot batteries, every Asian partner that has deployed Patriot as part of its American alliance commitments, every European NATO member that relies on Patriot for its territorial air defense, has made a capital investment measured in billions of dollars based on the performance specifications and the combat reputation that American defense officials and defense contractors have sold alongside the hardware. Saudi Arabia has spent billions on Patriot systems and upgrades. The UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, all have significant Patriot deployments financed through American foreign military sales programs and through direct purchases from Raytheon that the American defense budget facilitated in various ways. If the combat performance of Patriot against Russian-derived Iranian threats demonstrates that the system's actual performance falls significantly below its sold capabilities against a prepared adversary using the specific countermeasures that the most capable potential adversaries possess, the implications for the American defense export market, for American alliance relationships, for the credibility of American security guarantees that are underwritten by American hardware are enormous. Every government that has bought Patriot batteries based on the performance specifications and the combat reputation that American officials endorsed is now watching the system's actual performance in the most relevant real-world test environment that has ever been available and drawing conclusions that no amount of official explanation can fully override. And the defense budget implications for the United States itself, the cost of either upgrading Patriot to address the vulnerabilities that the current conflict has exposed or replacing it with a system that can reliably address the evolved threat environment are additions to the $39 trillion debt load that arrive at the worst possible moment fiscally. Here is what the Gulf states are doing with the information that Patriot's performance is generating, because their response is not simply a matter of tactical air defense adjustment. It is a strategic reassessment that compounds every other element of the Gulf realignment story that has been building throughout this conflict. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar have all been watching their own Patriot batteries in active employment against exactly the threat that the systems were purchased to defeat. The performance data they are collecting is real-time, comprehensive, and classified at a level that prevents public discussion, but does not prevent it from informing the procurement decisions, the alliance calculations, and the strategic conversations that are happening in every Gulf defense ministry right now. The procurement implication is the most immediate. Every Gulf state with Patriot batteries is now evaluating alternative air defense systems with an urgency that pre-conflict procurement planning did not require. The Israeli Iron Dome and David's sling systems, which have their own performance characteristics and their own limitations, but which operate on different principles than Patriot, are being examined with new interest by Gulf states whose Abraham Accords relationships with Israel make Israeli defense cooperation more politically feasible than it would have been 5 years ago. The Russian S-400 system, whose acquisition by Turkey triggered the crisis that removed Ankara from the F-35 program, is being evaluated again by Gulf states that previously declined it under American pressure, but that are now asking whether the system's performance against Russian-derived threats might be more relevant than the American diplomatic objections to its acquisition. The Chinese HQ-9 system is receiving similar renewed attention. The air defense procurement landscape in the Gulf is being reshaped by combat performance data in ways that will take years to fully manifest in contracts and deployments, but that are already visible in the conversations that defense officials in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are having with counterparts in Moscow, Beijing, and Tel Aviv that would not have been happening at this intensity before the current conflict demonstrated the specific gaps in the American systems their countries depend on. Here is the alliance credibility dimension of Patriot's performance that goes beyond procurement decisions to the deeper question of what American security guarantees are actually worth in the current threat environment. American security guarantees to Gulf partners have always rested on 3 pillars. The first is American willingness to deploy military force in defense of those partners. The second is American diplomatic influence that shapes the regional environment in ways that reduce the threats those partners face. The third is American military technology that provides concrete, measurable, dependable protection against specific identified threats. The current conflict has stressed all 3 pillars simultaneously. The willingness pillar has been tested by the 13-base withdrawal and the constrained response to Diego Garcia. The diplomatic pillar has been tested by the need for Pakistani intermediaries to achieve outcomes that American diplomacy alone could not produce. And the technology pillar is now being tested by Patriot's performance against the specific threat combination that Russian technology and Iranian operational adaptation have created. When all 3 pillars are under stress simultaneously, the partners whose security depends on them begin the reassessment process that produces the Gulf realignment story that runs through every chapter of the current crisis. Patriot's failure against Russian-derived threats is not an isolated technical story. It is the third leg of a strategic stool that is wobbling in ways that every Gulf government, every Asian ally, and every European NATO member is watching with the attention of states whose security planning depends on the stool holding weight. Here is the Russian strategic logic behind providing Iran with the technology to defeat American air defense, because understanding why Moscow made this specific technology available to Tehran is essential to understanding what it means for the broader competition between the American-led order and the Russian-Chinese alternative that is being constructed in the spaces that American strategic overextension and American fiscal constraint have created. Russia's primary strategic objective in the current decade is the weakening of the American-led alliance system in ways that reduce American capacity to contest Russian interests in Eastern Europe and in the post-Soviet space. Every demonstration that American military technology underperforms against Russian-derived countermeasures advances that objective by reducing the credibility of American security guarantees, reducing the confidence of American partners in the reliability of American hardware, and generating pressure on American defense budgets that adds to the $39 trillion fiscal burden that constrains American strategic options. Providing Iran with the electronic warfare and missile maneuver technology to penetrate Patriot costs Russia relatively little indirect resources. The technology is derived from systems Russia already has in inventory. The transfer can be managed through the defense cooperation relationship that Russia and Iran have been deepening across the current conflict in ways that include Russian weapons transfers to Iran in exchange for Iranian drone and missile technology that Russia has been using in Ukraine. It is a mutual benefit arrangement. Iran gets the capability to defeat American air defense in the Gulf. Russia gets Iranian drone and missile production capacity that supplements Russian defense industrial output during the sanctions-constrained period of the Ukraine conflict. And Russia also gets the strategic benefit of watching American air defense credibility erode in the most visible possible operational environment. The technology transfer cost Russia relatively little. The strategic return is being measured in Gulf state procurement reassessments, in alliance credibility erosion, and in additions to the $39 trillion American debt burden that will compound for decades. Here is the upgrade path problem that makes Patriot's current performance gap more than a temporary technical setback. Because the instinct of American defense officials facing a performance gap is to announce an upgrade program that addresses the identified deficiencies, and to argue that the upgrade timeline is short enough that the gap does not represent a durable strategic vulnerability. That instinct is correct in environments where the adversary's capability is static and the upgrade timeline is shorter than the adversary's own development pace. It is wrong in the current environment. And the technology that Iran has activated against Patriot is not static. It is a capability that Russian and Iranian engineers are actively developing further based on performance data collected from real combat engagements against American and partner air defense systems in the current conflict. Every Patriot intercept attempt in the current theater generates data for the adversary about which aspects of their electronic warfare and maneuvering approach are working and which need further development. That data is being incorporated into capability improvements in a development cycle that is faster than the American defense acquisition process that would need to produce Patriot upgrades or replacements. The American defense acquisition system, optimized for producing exquisitely capable systems through a process that takes years and costs enormous amounts of money, is being outpaced in the specific domain of air defense countermeasure development by an adversary development process that is faster, cheaper, and directly informed by real combat performance data. Closing that gap through the existing American defense acquisition process would require years and add billions to the $39 trillion debt load. Not closing it means accepting that American air defense in the Gulf will continue to underperform against the specific threat combination that the current conflict has revealed and validated. Here is what the American military and defense community is not saying publicly about Patriot's performance and why the silence is as revealing as any official statement. American defense officials have a strong institutional interest in not publicly acknowledging that the signature air defense system that anchors every American security guarantee in the Gulf and across it. The alliance network is underperforming against a specific threat combination that American officials told partner governments the system could reliably defeat. The reasons are obvious. Acknowledging the performance gap undermines every current sales relationship, every current deployment, every current alliance commitment underwritten by Patriot capability. It generates political pressure in Congress and in partner government capitals that would be difficult to manage while the current conflict is ongoing. It provides adversaries with information about American vulnerability that they could exploit in ways that current American operational planning has not fully accounted for. So the silence is maintained, performance is described in language carefully chosen to avoid false claims while not fully acknowledging the gap. Upgrade programs are referenced in ways that imply the gap is being addressed without specifying either the magnitude of the gap or the timeline for addressing it. And partner governments, whose own political needs require them to maintain public confidence in the American systems their security depends on, largely cooperate with the silence because the alternative, publicly acknowledging that the shield they paid billions for has significant gaps against the specific threats they face, is politically more costly than the silence. But the silence does not change the performance data. And the performance data is being read by every government in the world with an interest in air defense procurement and an intelligence service capable of monitoring the current conflict with the technical sophistication that monitoring requires. Here is the Israeli air defense comparison that every Gulf state and every American ally is now making and that the American defense establishment finds deeply uncomfortable. Israel operates the most sophisticated and most layered air defense architecture in the world. Iron Dome for short-range threats. David's Sling for medium-range ballistic and cruise missiles, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 for long-range ballistic missile threats. This layered approach, which uses different systems optimized for different threat categories and different engagement geometries, produces a defensive architecture whose redundancy and depth the single-system Patriot approach cannot replicate. The October 2023 Iranian ballistic missile attack on Israel and the subsequent Iranian attacks during the current conflict have provided performance data on the Israeli layered architecture that is being studied by every defense ministry in the world with access to the intelligence. The Israeli architecture's performance against mass ballistic missile attacks has not been perfect. No air defense architecture against a large-scale coordinated attack is or can be perfect. But the Israeli approach of layering systems with different intercept geometries and different performance characteristics creates a defense in depth that is significantly more robust against the specific three-layer Iranian attack approach, electronic warfare plus maneuvering plus saturation, than a single-system Patriot deployment can provide. Gulf states watching the comparison are drawing the obvious conclusion. The security architecture they need is not the American single-system Patriot deployment that their current agreements provide. It is a multi-layered system that includes capabilities the American export market currently restricts, Israeli systems whose export to Gulf states creates its own political complications, and potentially Chinese or Russian systems that Washington's alliance management instincts would prefer to prevent. The air defense gap is forcing a procurement conversation that is simultaneously a strategic conversation about which technology ecosystem each Gulf state will anchor its security on going forward. And that conversation is not resolving in America's favor. Here's the drone dimension of the air defense story that most analysis treats separately, but that is inseparable from the Patriot performance question. The current conflict has been the first large-scale combat deployment of the Iranian drone force at a scale and intensity that provides genuine performance data across every category of drone capability that Iran has developed. Shaheds, Mohajer variants, the loitering munitions that Iran has been producing and transferring to Russian inventory in Ukraine and that are now being employed in the Gulf theater, all of these represent an additional layer of aerial threat that sits below the ballistic missile threat in terms of speed and sophistication, but that creates its own air defense challenge. Patriot is not optimized for drone threats. It is a system designed for high-speed ballistic targets. Using Patriot interceptors, which cost millions of dollars per round, against relatively cheap Iranian drones, whose unit cost is measured in tens of thousands of dollars, is a cost-exchange ratio that compounds the $39 trillion debt problem with every engagement. The cost asymmetry is a strategic calculation that Iran has made explicitly, and that American air defense planners have been struggling to address without a clean solution. The solutions being developed, directed energy weapons, cheaper short-range interceptors, electronic drone countermeasures, are all programs in development whose timelines and costs add to the fiscal burden that the $39 trillion debt load is already creating. The drone layer below the ballistic missile layer above both sit outside the core Patriot performance envelope in ways that the current conflict has made visible in the most operationally consequential way possible. Watch the air defense procurement announcements coming from Gulf states over the next 12 months, when countries that have previously purchased and publicly endorsed Patriot as their primary air defense solution begin diversifying toward Israeli, Russian or Chinese alternatives in the specific coverage categories where Patriot has been most visibly tested in the current conflict. You are watching the market's honest assessment of combat performance expressed through procurement decisions that diplomatic language cannot obscure. Watch the American defense budget submissions for evidence of emergency Patriot upgrade funding that goes beyond the baseline modernization programs that were planned before the current conflict. The size and the urgency of those supplemental requests will tell you more about how seriously the American defense establishment is assessing the performance gap than any public statement. Watch the defense industrial base response. When Raytheon's communications to investors about future Patriot order flows begin to include hedging language that was not present before the current conflict, the market is telling you what official statements are avoiding. And watch Russia. Watch the specific technology transfer packages that intelligence reporting attributes to Russian-Iranian defense cooperation in the months following the current conflict's most visible Patriot penetrations. The next generation of Russian-derived capability being transferred to Iran now, optimized based on the combat performance data from the current engagements, will be the threat that the Patriot upgrade program announced in response to the current conflict's exposure will need to address when it is finally deployed in 3 to 5 years. And by then the adversary will have moved again. That is the cycle. And breaking it requires not just better technology, but a faster and more financially sustainable process for developing and deploying it than the $39 trillion debt load and the existing American defense acquisition bureaucracy are currently capable of producing. Stay with this story. Because the missile that got through the shield changed everything. The governments, the markets, the alliance partners, and the adversaries who watched it happen have all updated their calculations in ways that will compound through procurement decisions, through alignment shifts, through defense budget debates, and through the strategic conversations happening right now in capitals around the world. The shields are not going to get better faster than the missiles. Not at the current pace, not with the current resources, not on the current timeline.